Michael Hugh.
So I get the distinct pleasure of playing Oprah tonight. She couldn't be here. I'm going to try to see if I can get him to cry. We're rolling this. I want to start just by saying I got introduced to Dean through Terry Bartow and, of course, Dennis and Julie Smith. And then my lovely wife, Kimberly, put phone calls on all of you to get you here. So we really appreciate all of you coming. You know, tonight is Traces of Humanity is the theme of this, and it's an opportunity to meet this wonderful artist. And what I thought we would do is share a little bit about what the inspiration of this artwork is, how he got to, from where he grew up, to be able, as an African-American kid, to be able to get on this journey and do it. And I think what you're going to find is his story is very similar to many of your stories. It's unlikely beginnings and finishing through ambition, and where there was no one to lead. And his story touched me and Kimberly so greatly that we immediately felt that it was important for us to get a part of this. So I thought what we'd do is just have a little conversation and give you a chance just to kind of listen in, and I think it'll give you a window into the artwork. He is perhaps one of best kept secrets in the art field. He is won over 400 awards, and yet he's not a household name. And some of that is purposeful, as you'll hear tonight, is he has stayed principled to the work that he does and what he believes in, as opposed to perhaps more commercial ways that you can make money in this business. And through his journeys, he'll tell you how he learned about the business of art, and there is a business to the fine arts world, and how he went on that journey. So without further ado, let me get into it. You grew up in Quincy, Florida. You grew up with your grandmother. You grew up with your aunt, and a lot of strong women who really were part of your upbringing, no father figure. Tell us a little bit about what growing up in Quincy, Florida and moving to Philadelphia was like.
Oh, wow. First of all, I was raised by my grandmother from 11 months old. And apparently, at that time, my mother was not a wed mother. And so she actually fled the small town out of embarrassment, and also by the fact that she was in college and they could have kicked her out had they known that she was pregnant. So she gave birth to me and wrote my Uncle Ben, her brother, a letter about me, and said that she's given birth to a child, and she came home without me. And so when she arrived, my grandmother and my grandma Celia and my grandfather at the time, my maternal grandfather, said, "So where's the child?" And so they said, "Wherever he's at, you go back and you get him, and we will raise him, and you will go back to school and finish school." And that's what my mother did. And my grandmother was the one who bought me a paint-by-number set when I was a boy. I guess if you know much about boys, if you got kids. I have twins now, and I have a little boy. They're very active. So I was probably very active, so she got me a paint-by-number set. And this was actually the beginning of my falling in love with art. And so from that paint-by-number set, that was the inspiration, and from that day forward, I've always loved to draw and to paint.
Did you get an opportunity to study in class, or did you have an art school, or how is it that you went from a paint-by-number set to thinking that you had the talent for art?
Well, actually, I think the paint-by-number set was, if you're familiar with paint-by-number sets, they have little dialogues for you with little numbers to follow the colors by. And because it was so tedious and uninteresting to me that way, I freehand the image myself and painted it. And so, as far as studying, well, no, in Quincy, I mean, art was kind of, you know, there was no artist, there were no role models. It was a small country town. And so, as I got older, art was not something that my mother encouraged, particularly after she had gotten an education, because she had told me up front, and frankly, a black man cannot make a living selling pictures in America. And if you're going to try to pursue this, then maybe you need to go to Europe. And then if you get recognition in Europe, then maybe America would take you on. But if you all know the Henry Tanner story, that did not happen for Tanner. So why was I thinking it was going to happen for me?
So you had the paint-by-number set. Did you do any research? I mean, when you went to study people that were, you know, the professional artists, Picasso, or who were the people that you saw when you first started looking at artwork?
You know, actually, when I moved to Philadelphia, I became a little bit more familiar with other artists because there was a bookstore that had all these different flyers and different things and different artists. And Picasso was one of the first ones that I actually was interested in, quite frankly. And then, of course, there was Norman Rockwell, because he was on the Saturday Evening Post, and so my auntie got the Saturday Evening Post. I became familiar with that. And she also had a lot of other magazines, and I became familiar with a competition you could enter to win a scholarship. It was some kind of famous artist school thing, and it was homeschooling you. They would homeschool you. Well, apparently I thought I won the scholarship. The guy comes over and he's trying to sell my mother on this homeschool thing. And she said, that costs way too much money. Nobody's going to pay for that. And she said, well, he could buy his own book. So what I did was, instead of eating lunch, I would take my lunch money and I would save it for 3 months or so, and then I would buy an art book. And so that's how.
So you were thin, I take it, during that.
Yeah.
That's a good reason why I never would have been an art. But, so who were some of the black artists during this time frame when you went to buy these books? Were there any?
I didn't know of any black artists. There weren't any books that I knew of. I did know that there was a museum in Philadelphia, but my mother was not interested in taking me to a museum. In fact, there was a neighbor who had said, well, since your son's interested in art, why don't you take him to the Saturday schools? And so, you know, my mother was just not going to give her for a weekend to take me to art schools. And I had said, well, Mom, I could get on the trolley in the bus. And she said, well, because you got to go through a lot of dangerous neighborhoods to get there, I wasn't allowed to go. So I bought my own books and I just practiced on my own.
So by the time you got to high school, Tom Harris was a teacher that was there that guided you a little bit to say that maybe you had a little talent, maybe this could be something that you could do.
Yeah, at that time we were in Philadelphia, and the reason we moved to Philadelphia was my grandmother got ill and she couldn't really take care of us very well. So we all moved up there, my cousin Carl and I. Well, my grandmother got better, she wanted to move back to Quincy. So we moved back to Quincy. So I had maybe a 3 or 4 year gap there in terms of relationships with people. And there was a teacher there, Tom Harris, who was very much into his students. And there was another gentleman there by the name of Pete, who was very, very talented. And he was the one that really got us all hyped up about the art shows, and Mr. Harris would take us to all these different competitions where you would compete against other high school students and stuff like that. Well, Pete was really the star. The rest of us were kind of like, sort of like the tag-alongs, but the community, we were, I can say that. And so he would always win all the top prizes in the professional category. Anyway, as things went along, we all got a chance to go to art school, but Mr. Harris was taking us around at the time when I really didn't know, because he never shared a lot of those stories with us, but he was called the nigger lover for taking us 3 young black kids to all these different art shows. And the only reason why I know that is because there is a documentary that it will get done. We've been working on this thing for a while. But I asked him to, you know, to tell his real experiences with taking us around at those different art shows, because we were the only black kids there. We were the only black people there.
So you went from high school and you said you all went to college. So
yes.
Where did you go to college? How did you get to this college?
It was by random choice, actually. There was some catalogs, some old brochures at the guidance counselor's office, and Pete had already chosen, I believe, the Cleveland Art Institute. He had a whole bunch of people helping him with his portfolio and all kinds of things. Well, the rest of us, we kind of just sort of thumbing through different magazines. So I had my mom to send to like 3 or 4 different schools, and I was waiting to see if I could get accepted. Well, the funny thing about the whole process is that I missed the idea of getting a scholarship because I didn't know there was such thing as a portfolio. I sent my work up to a school in a little brown envelope. You know, and it's only by the grace of God that I got into art school, quite frankly. Because when I found out what a portfolio was when I got to art school, I was like, God, how did they think me? So I was really surprised.
So where'd you go?
I went to the Columbus College of Art and Design in Ohio.
So when you got there, you're this young emerging artist, and you start looking at the works of the other students and the quality of work, and did you fit in? Were you up to par? What was your sense when you got there? Were you up to the task?
Actually, it was a shock because, you know, when you're in a small town like Quincy, and people say, well, you're really talented, you're really gifted, you're really this and that. Well, you don't know until you get into a real school and you got something to compare yourself to. Because most people who are uneducated in terms of what goes on in terms of art and what it takes to be an artist, they have no idea that a lot of kids have been tutored They've had private instructions and all kinds of stuff. You get into school and you find out, whoa, I said maybe I don't belong here, because when I got into color classes, they were using different terminologies that I totally didn't understand. There was all these different abstract things to me, and I was really actually very, very frustrated, and was actually going to drop out after my first semester because I lost so much weight. And I was very thin when I went back home, so my grandmother wasn't very thrilled about it. But my mother said, well, what are you going to do? I can't take care of you the rest of your life. So I got back on the Greyhound bus.
Sucked it up.
Sucked it up.
So you get there and you learn these new terminologies like gesture drawing and what are those things? So what was those kind of things?
Oh man, that was an eye-opener for me. You know, my high school art teacher would talk about gesture drawing, but we thought, whatever about the gesture drawing. We were like, when you're drawing something, a lot of times when you're not very skilled at what you're doing or don't have the knowledge, you draw a head first, and you put the shoulder on, you put the arm on, that kind of thing. And what happens is when you do it that way, a lot of times the proportions are off. They're not accurate. And so we had a guy there from Yale University. I remember that drawing. We had live nude models that would come in and pose for us, and he walked around very carefully.
That's how I got through college, by the way.
Well, Michael, you must be up here.
Sorry. I digress.
But anyway, he walked around very carefully, and so he said, he looked at it, he said, well, I guess he probably figured that a lot of us didn't know much about foundation drawing. So he sat down in a chair, and he had the model to move every 30 seconds. 15 seconds, and then he moved 30 seconds. And then he did what you call gesture drawings. Well, he did what you call the essence of a movement with a few lines. And then finally he said, a minute or 2 minutes. Within 2 or 3 minutes he had drawn the complete figure. It was miraculous. And I said, oh, where I did that. That's what gesture drawing made sense. But it was an eye-opener.
And that led to an interest in watercolor?
Yeah, that led to, actually there was a student there that had came in, same year I came in, and I saw for the first time what a portfolio looked like. I was on a work study program, and this guy came through. I was sweeping the hallway and had this huge black thing with two handles to it. And I said, what's that? He said, oh, it's my portfolio. Some of the instructors want to see my watercolors. And I said, you mind if I take a look at it when you come back through? When you come back through? He said, sure. Well, this kid was just a phenom. I'm not kidding you. I said, he opened up this portfolio, and I looked at it, and I said, that's a watercolor? He said, yeah. I said, whoa. It was an eye-opener. He was a student. And I ran back to the dorm, and I was staying with another guy named Charles and Jesse. They were both African-American, and I ran and I said, man, I just saw some watercolors, and they already knew the guy. They said, John Pelham? I said, yep. I said, how'd y'all know? I just saw it. They said, man, you ain't gonna never get that good. And you know what, that next day, when I got my little brown butter, I went and checked out every book I could check out on watercolor. And I did my assignments, and I did extra work. And they were over in the corner giggling. And they were laughing at me. You know what? Went home for the summer. I was practicing and practicing. Sophomore year, they weren't laughing. They weren't laughing.
So sophomore year almost didn't happen.
And almost
freshman year, you lost 40 pounds.
Yeah,
which
I did.
At this point, was a lot of weight for you to lose.
Well, yeah, I was actually afraid to go back because the competition, and then on top of that, when we did the orientation there, they said half of you will not be back. They tell you that you're going to put in as many hours as an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. I thought, here's my little country thing. I'm thinking, we're just going to be drawing pictures. We're going to be putting that many hours just to keep drawing some pictures. Well, you find out there's color classes, there's design classes, there's figure draw. On top of all your art classes, then you have all your academics. And then you have painting, first foundation painting, and believe it or not, color class alone, we only worked in black and white for a complete semester. We were not allowed to use any color. We had to use black and white paint, so we had to create atmosphere and all kinds of stuff for the movement with just black and white.
So I mentioned how you kind of went on a journey learning what business of art is and how you make an income in art. And I remember when we talked, I got a chance to see your studio in Tampa, and we spent some hours there. And you mentioned that a friend of yours, Ray Ledbetter, and you went around and toured because you said, how are black folks going to make money in this business?
Well, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
how did that pan out?
Well, that panned out to be a shocker too, because Ray Leatherberry was an artist who was a year or so ahead of me, and we had heard about these artists who had African American artists who went to France and Paris. They studied all these different academies and stuff.
What your mom had suggested might be a route for you.
More route for me. That's absolutely right. So we were all excited, and a guy had opened up a gallery. I think if my memory served me, I think his name was Koji. He was a photographer. So Ray and I got really excited, and we went over to the show, and of course the artists were like 2 or 3 times our age. And we were looking at the prices of the artwork. Well, by then, believe it or not, I was selling my work in a little gallery in Panama City for like $40, $25. And guess what? These artists were selling their work for the same amount of money. And we walked out of there and we were shocked. And Ray and I looked at each other and we went, whoa, something's wrong. And I started researching artists because I became very, very curious. There was a museum right next to the school. So as I went through the rooms, I didn't see anything of us, image-wise, and I didn't see any names of any African-American artists. I had an art history book. There was nothing in that. And I thought, wow, maybe my mom was right. Maybe this ain't something that black folks, and my auntie said, black people, they don't spend that kind of money on pictures. That's white people stuff, And so I said, wow, I started researching them, and then I found out that quite a few of them were really from well-off families. They were from well-off families. Then I found out about Thomas Akins, how Henry Tanner studied under him, the African-American artist Henry Tanner. And I read his story. And then as I began to emerge on the scene, I ran into older artists who were telling me about the difficulties of selling their work and making a living and all these different things. And I thought, wow, maybe this is, maybe I better rethink some of this.
So you put all this effort into it, fell in love with watercolor art, went out and realized that the route going to Europe really wasn't going to be a successful route in terms, because if they couldn't do it successfully, there was no reason to believe that you could. So you told me you came up with this new plan, which was entering in competitions in a way that maybe you thought, because you didn't have any money, that you might be able to make a living. So what was your plan after this?
Well, it's really funny. There was a guy named Walter King who was a student. He was a white fellow. He was poor, just like I was. He was just Caucasian. But I was talking about how I wanted to be a fine artist. I said, Dean, that's, fine art, it's hard to make a living. I said, yeah, but that's really what I really, really want to do. And I said, well, Walter, here's the plan. So I've been researching all these artists. I said, you ever heard of National Academy and American Watercolor Society, all these different art organizations out of New York? He said, oh. And I said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter competitions. And that's going to be my platform into the art world. Because I don't have any money, I don't have any real political connections. And from what I understand, people are already connected to the art world. And that's how I got my foot in. And I also wanted to do it too, because as I began to emerge on the scene in terms of getting my work represented, I found out that very few mainstream galleries had artists of color in their galleries. And I thought, well, and then a lot of my friends who were becoming known and stuff, in illustration said that was the way to go, not fine art. That it was not the way to go.
So the creme de la creme of that is the American Watercolor Society and
the National Academy.
The National Academy, and most people who try to enter in that don't do very well. And so, when did you get your first opportunity to apply? And how long did it take?
You know what? I had a watercolor instructor who thought I was pretty good. He said, in fact, he was the one who actually introduced me to the American Watercolor Society. His name was Leland McClellan. And he said, have you ever heard of it? I said, no. I said, I've been doing some research, but I said, but I'm not really familiar with the process. So he said, I enter it every year. He said, I think you should give it a shot. I think you might have a chance. So I entered my senior year in college, and I got in. And I was just thrilled. I couldn't wait to come back and tell Mr. McClellan. I said, Mr. McClellan, I got American Watercolor. He said, shut up, you what? You did? I said, yeah, Mr. McClellan did. He said, "Can you believe you got in your first try? I've been trying 20 years now." And then it spread through the school like wildfire, and I got in, and the instructor wanted to see the painting and all kinds of stuff. And actually, I had won an award that year in the Society of Illustrators student exhibition. And the school, for the first time, flew all the students up who had won an award that year, and it was the first time I'd ever been on a plane. And one of the girls who won one of the awards, too, was from New York. So she said, "We got to go to the National Academy to see Dean's painting." So, you know, I went up to see my work, and I was like 20, 21 years old. Wow. Fantastic. It's amazing.
And so you mentioned about Pete Henson, and he was sort of the star in your neighborhood growing up, and he went to Cleveland Art School, and he had tremendous success early on.
Very much.
How did his career pan out, and what influences did you gain from sort of watching him as a contemporary?
Well, part of what I realized from Pete was that when we were younger, Pete would always win all the prize, and usually the prize came with a little bit of money. And my grandmother would always say, "Well, did you win anything?" I said, "Well, I got a ribbon." She said, "Well, what Pete win?" She said, "Well, he always win." I said, "Yeah, he's really good, girl." And she said, "He's very," I said, "Yeah, he's just really good, girl. He's really good." And so what I recognized from that was that a lot of the Caucasian people in the community was buying his work. In fact, he has some paintings hanging up in the Quincy courthouse right now that was commissioned. They specially created a job for him to create these paintings in Gaston County. And they still have those hanging there. And so, but what I recognized was, if I'm going to enter these shows, I got to win. I have to win. Because I recognized when he was winning Best Show, doing his teenage years and stuff, people, they wanted a winner. I said, people like winner. I can't be second. I can't be third. I got to be first. And it wasn't arrogance. It's just that I recognize that people respond to excellence and the best. And that's what I went for. And so Pete was actually an education for me, watching how people gravitated to him at a young age and buying his work. And so he became very successful very quickly, and I think that he got to the Cleveland Art Institute, and I think he might have got overwhelmed too. He had success very early, and then he moved back to Quincy, which I thought was not a good idea for art in those days. And well, anyway, things just did not work out. He just, a lot of stuff got thrown into the pie. And I actually, everybody tried to help him. I mean, I can't tell you how many people tried to help him. And he's very gifted, but just, we don't know why. We don't know whether it was success too early, was there a lot of pressure. But he did get a job right away with the Phipps family. Phipps family really liked him. They hired him at WCTV. He was there for a good amount of time, and I tried to get him to enter the American Watercolor Society, different things. He even tried the gallery in Panama City for a while. That didn't quite work out either. You know, it's one of those kind of things where you don't know. What I recognize too from that, every decision that you make, no matter how small you think it is, it could be a very significant part of the puzzle. You know, it's kind of like you could have a wonderful thing going, but if you don't put that one stone in there that supports all that.
It was an education for you, lesson in humility, watching a contemporary and seeing what success early can be.
And I think too, I wasn't so much, I didn't have people expecting anything of me, you see, but he had a whole community looking at him and who was supporting him and doing a lot of things for him. So I didn't have the pressure that he had. The pressure that I had was just upon myself, that here was a grandmother who had taken me in with a fourth grade education, who was always drilling, get a good education, that's your way out. And when I was in art school and I started feeling sorry for myself, I lost all this weight, I said, you know what? You know, my grandmother didn't even have an opportunity. At least I got a shot at it.
So the plan was working, at least you could see a level playing field and a way for you to move forward with it. So you graduate from college and you go get your first job at Hallmark.
At Hallmark.
And how does that work out?
No.
Are you in the greeting card section doing
yeah,
yeah,
that was interesting. You know, quite frankly, you know, Hallmark was another learning tool. I ran into a lot of wonderful artists, a few who were African Americans who were employed there. But what I did learn, I learned the politics of the corporate world, which I was totally out of touch with. they really liked me. They thought I was very gifted, and I do know I got to work in what they call S&I. Well, because they asked me what department I wanted to work in. Well, and I said, well, S&I, I want to work in S&I. And they said, why? I said, well, it seems more interesting. And apparently they don't usually hire artists right into that. You have to work your way up.
That's nice, style and innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to work up to that. Well, they hired me right into there. And anyway, when I went in the next day, there was all these artists who were coming up to me. There were some were African American, quite a few of them from down in Green Card. And I was talking about art shows and different kind of thing. They said, you know, Hallmark doesn't like you talking about that kind of stuff. And I said, no, you don't care. I've already talked to the vice president about this. Come to find out they did. And I was entering these different shows. And one of the shows that I entered was the T.H. Saunders International Arts and Watercolor Competition. And one of the reasons why, because it was in London. And top prize was $2,000. Well, I had to work all month to bring home almost $1,000 from Hallmark. I thought, wow, forget the women. It would just be neat to hang, to say you hung something in Europe. Hey, hey. Well, I got accepted, and I won the top award, which was a $2,000 prize. Well, at the time, I only had $300 in my account. It cost me $100 to get it framed, and then another $100 to ship it over there. So that left me
You were rolling the dice with 100
so
left.
yeah, I was like, you know, this may not be a good idea, this Europe thing.
So that's a good segue to taking risks.
Yeah, yeah.
But so you rolled the dice and you won the first prize, and that really was what your goal was about winning in these competitions, as we said, to level the playing field. How did the winning at Hallmark go over with? Did you?
Well, it wasn't well received. Well, that year I had been in over 20 shows, national shows. And within a 4-month span, I had won about $6,000 in different shows that I had entered. And so there was an article in a publication there, the Artist Coalition. Still remember all that stuff. Anyway, Artist Coalition. And they had my page on the front cover that I had won. And when I walked into work, I saw it on the secretary's desk. I said, oh no, it's going to be some crap today. And so there was. They didn't really like it. They wanted me to stop. And I said, look, you know, this is something you said I could do. Now suddenly I can't do it. And so I didn't realize the guy that was over my department actually, at one time, wanted to be a painter. And had studied under the famous painter Thomas Hart Benton. And had sold out to Hallmark. He was the one who was saying, he said, you know, you need to make up your mind whether you want to be here or whether you want to be out there. And I said, no, I don't. I said, I give you what you want on your time. I said, what I do in my own free time, according to Mr. Parker, I can do whatever I want as long as it's not doing something for the competitor.
You didn't know corporate
I didn't know the corporate politics.
So you lost your job at Hallmark.
I did after, you know, what was really funny though, after 3 months interview, Mr. Parker called me and wanted to know if I was going to make a career out of it. And I said, I don't really know yet. And he said, well, why so? I said, well, you know, Mr. Parker, I've only been here about 3 months. And I said, you really want my honest opinion? He said, yeah, what's your honest opinion about the job? How you feel about it? I said, well, quite frankly, Mr. Parker, I said, I don't see any African Americans in any positions of authority at Hallmark. I said, so you're asking me if I'm going to make a career out of something where I see none of us in the creative division of this. I said, I can't speak for the rest of the department, but there's nobody in any position of power, authority, or managers hardly or anything. I said, so now you're asking me if I'm going to make a career out of it? I don't know. Should Hallmark change and I see other African Americans moving up the ladder and I see some changes? Perhaps. But the way I see it right now, Mr. Parker, I think not.
So you're on your own and you've decided you're going to have to rough it because you're principled to what you believe in. So who are the artists that you start to see now that inspire you in the work that we see here tonight? What are the influences that generate?
Oh, you know, my influences, you know, what people have to realize with my work is that it was heavily, it's what you call, what most would say, a more Eurocentric or European influence. And my thing is like this, I look at art as information. And I don't care who's doing it, what culture, because all great artists, when you look at Picasso and all these great artists, or Matisse, or any of them, or Jacob Lawrence, any of these great, Henry Tanner, these great artists, they didn't get so caught up into race. It was the culture of the time that was caught up into race. These men were on a higher intellectual level about learning about humanity and presenting something that was real to to the human form, to the human emotion. But at certain times in our history, race and all these kind of ignorant things came into play to suppress us from becoming a better and bigger, greater nation. We could be a greater nation without all this nonsense. So I looked at things like, I didn't care who it was from, what. I looked at Rembrandt, Picasso, Matisse, Renoir, Henry Tanner, Jacob Lawrence, you name it. If I think I'm gonna look and I'm gonna try to learn from it, because I mean that's how you grow as a painter. That's how you grow as an artist.
People say Andrew Wyeth and people like that.
Andrew Wyeth,
looked like your artwork, who's a white painter.
Yes.
But painted black subjects.
Yes.
But in the black community, people said your work wasn't black enough.
Well, yeah, I had somebody say, well, what are you going to do with some black art? And I was like, well, I'm black. I'm doing art. I said, you know, I don't really get the whole black art thing. You know, I kind of understand there's a certain kind of style of art that may be associated with a more, what you call a more derivative of the continent of Africa. We know Africa is a big place. But the one thing that I learned about that was when I looked at Picasso, and like I said, all great artists, they pull from any place they wanted to pull from. When you look at somebody like a Van Gogh, you go back and you study the Japanese woodblock cuts. There's your Van Gogh. He just used oil paint. But suddenly there was this new movement, the Impressionist movement. You know, new movement. I mean, Rembrandt was painting very impressionistic before the Impressionists came along. Some of his lateral portraits were very, very impressionistic in terms of his brushwork and handling of surface and texture. Very, very impressionistic. Just more Carol Struo, more light and dark. But as far as the activity in terms of the Burkwurst and the energy, all impressionist.
I'm going to shake my head and pretend I understood you. Trying to keep this on my end. We just treaded into the unknown. I get a little. I don't have a card for that. So you're out there and you're selling your work, and you kind of find out it's not so easy, and you go on a journey out in the Panhandle, which may not be the best place for a black artist to sell work, but you go to a dozen or so galleries, and tell us about that journey when you're...
Oh, yeah. You know what? My mother had actually encouraged me to enter a show that was in Panama City, and she saw it in the local newspaper. And she said, I think you should enter a show. And I looked, I said, well, that's got like 20, 30 channels. I probably won't even get in there. She said, well, baby, just try. So I entered it, and I won a prize. It was like a $100 savings bond. So I decided I was going to go down and pick it up. So we went down to the Marine Exhibit Center, and when I walked in, I said, I'm Dee Mitchell. And of course they recognized my name, and she said, you're black. So I was like, well, yeah. And here's how she said it to me. She said, oh, no, young man, don't get me wrong. She said, we're just so excited. You were the first black artist to ever enter our show. We were just so excited to have you, and they treated me so nicely. In fact, there was a lady by the name of Joanne Dickerson, thought I was very talented, and she was going to find me a gallery. That's when she took me up and down the Panhandle. Nobody wanted my work. So finally, she just finally had, they don't want to work because you're black, they're afraid you're going to run off their clientele, and she just went on this whole thing. So finally, we stopped at this one place, and I said, look, let's not take the work, I just want to look at the art. And we went in at Spellman's Gallery, and I was looking at the work, and there was a young guy, sort of hippie with a ponytail. He said, are you an artist or something? Yeah. He said, I could tell the way you're looking at artwork. He said, do you have any of your work here? And I looked at Joanne, like everybody else was saying no, and this guy's asking to see it. It's like, wow. I ran out and got the work, and he says, these are great. He said, I'll buy 5 of them right now, so. And I'll put the rest on consignment, whatever you're willing to leave, and I'll send you a check. And that was my first gallery.
It seems like there's times where you get to a point in your career, there's a bump in the road, and you lost 40 pounds, you almost gave up, you're almost out of artwork, you're almost down to your last $100, and you enter the prize in London. Here you're at the Panhandle, broke, and you sell a piece of work. So
it's very interesting. There has been a lot of pivotal points like that, because when I got fired from Hallmark, my grandmother passed not too much longer after that. And so I wound up in a little bitty apartment, and actually, quite frankly, I was very suicidal with not wanting to live, and depressed. I didn't have any money. I was broke. I was there. And then I could hear my mom's words, and I told you this, Art. And so I laid down on my little mattress in Box Springs at the time, feeling sorry for myself and crying and not wanting to go out. In fact, they called me the mountain man. I had a beard, I had hair I wouldn't comb, and all kind of stuff. And the soft voice said, "Baby, didn't I tell you nobody's going to give you anything this world? You got to work for it."
Yeah, you had a spiritual connection. You know, the art gallery here put a quote, and I just pulled it off the wall. I'll put it back, but I wanted to read it. I will put it back. And it says, "I'm drawn to the humane, but there is something more there, which I would describe as spiritual. I do believe in God. I do believe when you create that something else can take over. I've said this. Ask yourself, what is the intention for bringing this work of art into existence? If that intention is pure, to say something to humanity or to stir something in people, then you are tapping into another source beyond your control. If you are creating for self-indulgence or for gain, something will be lost, and I'm not sure it can be regained." That's what was the thought behind that?
I think that, you know, I think that's probably a lot of wisdom I got probably from my grandmother. You know, my grandmother and the people I grew up with didn't have a lot of material wealth. And my Aunt Dolly, she never learned how to read or write. But there was a dignity and an honor to how they handled things, and I watched that in a certain honor. And I've watched other people's careers throughout, you know, whether it's music or art or anything. And a lot of times, when you're not connected spiritually to a higher sense of why you're doing something, you're going to crash and burn. Doesn't matter how much money you make. It's not going to make you happy. It's not going to fill your soul. And you're going to do all kinds of crazy stuff looking to fill that hole. And that hole doesn't have anything to do with money. I mean, I recognize that I live in a capitalist society and I have to make money. I understand that. And I even understand even more so that I have a family. But I think that if you're trying to create something to move people to a higher place, to either get along with one another, to stop wars or famine or whatever it is that is crippling our way of life as a world, as a people, and I think that's a different kind of sensibility that you're bringing. And I think that people will respond to it. Sometimes it's not always within the artist's lifetime. Sometimes it takes people a while to catch up. Because sometimes there are certain things that make people uncomfortable. And art can do that to some people. It can make them very uncomfortable. Rowena made people uncomfortable. But she was such a powerhouse in terms of a strength and an emotion in that painting that I think that people just had to stop. And there are things that mesmerize the soul to the point that you just have to stop and question how you live in your own life. You just have to. Art does that. Great art does that.
You talked about Rowena, and you painted this black woman, ordinary woman, for an exhibit at the Hubbard exhibit. And how did you choose to paint Rowena, and what was the significance of that work?
It was actually, it was a way of celebrating my grandmother who had passed, and I could not get to actually model for me. So a friend had introduced her to me, and at the time, yeah, she was just, you know, very much that grounded, that she was solid. And I said, wow, she is something. And I didn't paint her for a few years or so. And then I got invited to this show. And I didn't realize I was the only African American. I was one of the youngest artists invited to this show, where I was competing for $250,000. And this was in 1990. I was the only artist of color invited. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to paint? And she was the first person that popped in my head for a week. And I said, I called her up and I said, it's on Father's Day. I said, think about, I want to have you model for me. And she says, yeah. She said, no, baby, you know. I said, she said, but I do need an air conditioner. I said, she said, well, I said, well, I tell you what, Miss Hubble, I'll come and pick you up, and I'll buy your air conditioner. I said, I'll buy your air conditioner. This friend of mine had brought her over, and she wanted to get this air conditioner. And I said, look, I said, I'll get the air conditioner. She said, no, baby, I can't let you spend that kind of money. I said, yeah, you can. And I took her out and I got her the air conditioner and I put it in for her in a little room. And she had that thing, I'm telling you, was blasting. She had a little freezing. She told, oh, it feels so good. I said, but how about, so I said, will you pose it? So she posed for me and everything, and I was working on the pace on it. She said, when am I going to see this thing? I said, how about, I got to have you come back over, I got to adjust the colors a little bit more. And she was sitting on the couch, I was trying to adjust the colors, and finally I showed it to her, and she looked at it. And she said, baby, ooh, like that. I'm gonna want a whole black woman. Or want something like that. What? Who's gonna want a whole black woman? You know, it just broke my heart. And when I sent it down to the Hubbard show, it got more interesting. Because at the opening, there was about, I don't know, a good 800 people there maybe. And people walked by the page, and it's beautiful, but I don't know where I put her at, because they were in the Western art. And so, Rowena, was an African-American figure, but apparently it had got a lot of attention, but nobody wanted it. And I didn't realize at the time that it was going to be a finalist. Well, my mother was at the show, and there was another artist that had did a painting of an African-American. And she didn't like it. And she said, I think that just looks very foolish. Why do you always got to make us look like that? And I said, well, we're not here. Anyway, that painting sold at Rowena didn't sell. Well, my mom was just livid. I said, well, we got to talk about this later when we get to the hotel. So anyway, I don't know what happened, whether Mr. Hubbard found it or not, but he came over, he sat next to us because they did a reception at his home. And he sat on my side. He said, you can consider Rowena sold, because my wife really loved that painting. You can consider it sold. He said, I'll tell your mama. And so what got more interesting, the next day they were going to announce who the $250,000 winner was. I was in the top 6. I didn't win, but I got the biggest applause. I got a bigger applause than the artist who actually had won all the money. And Joe Dale ran over to me and she said, Ms. Hubbard said, ooh, won't that make news? And it did.
And the newspaper actually said, the writer said, the guy that should have won, and the picture that everybody in the room loved the most was Rowena. But you sold Rowena for $40,000.
25. 25. And
inflation today.
Yeah. So what was really fascinating about that, I was standing with Mrs. Hubbard, and somebody else came along and offered her 40. You were right in that sense. And so Joe Dale was so funny. She just took a like to me. She said, "Ain't for sale. Ain't for sale. You had a chance to buy. Ain't for sale." And so anyway, she said, "You know, Dee," and I still see Joe Dale. In fact, when the recession hit, Joe Dale called trying to buy a painting from me. She called the gallery. I thought, that's interesting. Joe Dale got my number and everything. You could just call me. I have a kind of relationship with her. And so, come to find out, I looked up. She went into this gallery, bought like a couple of paintings. Somebody saw her buying. They bought a painting. Next thing you know, I got a gallery. Because of that. Because the recession had hit. So I think that she was, again, trying to help me. And she's always been that. She's just as sweet of a person. And in fact, when this documentary was going to get made, I said, Joe Dale, I said, this guy's from New York coming to do a documentary. I said, she said, New York. New York. I said, yeah, you Western people. They're always New York people. Anyway, I said, well, I'm not asking you for any money. What I need is an interview. And she did grant us an interview, which she doesn't really do. She's very extremely private. And I respect her a great deal. A great deal.
So the documentary Making of a Master chronicles the fact that you've won over 400 awards. You've written 2 books. Who did you do the books with?
Oh, well, I pretty much, well, I had a friend who helped me with the first one, A&A, but I pretty much, laid it out, designed it. And in fact, I had a publisher I was working with at that time, and I said, you got to understand, this book has been done, this is about 15 years ago. And when I first started talking about doing a book, a lot of you guys said, no, artists don't do their own books. It's not something you do. That was frowned upon. And I said, well, I kept looking, going into bookstores. I see 4 or 5 books of Picasso, all these different artists. Where I didn't see nobody. I didn't even see Jacob Lawrence, Tanner, nobody. I said, I'm going to do my own book. So I told the guy, I said, you know what, you don't want to do about my book. He said, well, we do. Who's going to be the marketer? Who's going to want to buy it? And he got into all that, the marketing aspect of it. I said, you know, I'm doing my own book. And so when I published it, and I sent it to the publisher, he said, who published your book? I said, you talking to him? He said, is this the book you was talking about doing? I said, well, yeah. He said, so who designed it for you? Who did the writing on that? I said, you talking to him? He said, you mean to tell me this is the book you was talking about? I said, yeah, I pre-sold it to my collector base. And I brought in almost half of the money before I went to press. So I pre-sold it to people who are collecting my work. And I offered them a drawing with the book to help offset the cost of it. Because at that time, a book could cost you, easily cost you $70,000.
Did you do a book with Maya Angelou too?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that.
Oh, that's oh, that's very interesting because I had met Maya some years ago because they had did a small documentary with Billy D. Williams, who was hosting the program along with another artist by the name of Thomas Black, who was very well known in the African American community. He's did a lot of historical scams and all kinds of things. And so they were only going to do Tom and I. Well, they couldn't get it on PBS. PBS, even with our credentials and what we done, PBS wasn't interested. But when Billy D said he would host it, suddenly we had a movie star. PBS picked it up. And so, but part of the deal was Billy had to have a section, so we each got 20 minutes instead. And so it premiered in New York. In fact, it played so much, believe it or not, you're not gonna kid you. I got recognized in the Metropolitan Museum of Art by a kid working at the counter. I said, power of the press. Here's why we're not known. Here's why this is why we in a household name. We ain't got nobody posting our book. We ain't got nobody making no documentaries about us. We ain't got no critics coming around talking about our art. We don't own the magazines. All the art magazines and publications I was in was mainstream. A lot of black people didn't read those magazines. So I wasn't becoming known there. I was becoming more known in mainstream. I was not becoming known in the black community. And it wasn't from a lack of not reaching out. I wrote Ebony, I wrote Essence, I wrote any of the black women. They just weren't interested. They were never interested. They were not interested.
So we'll wrap it with married, twin boys,
Yep.
living here in Tampa and traveling. So what's the next story for Dean Mitchell? Where do you go from here?
Oh, I'm enjoying my life right now. My kids, you know what? I'm hoping to continue to push the envelope in terms of trying to educate people more about the arts and the purpose of art and how it influences our lives economically, socially, spiritually, because I think that's very, very important, and I want to grow my kids up that way. And I want them to be sensitive to the world around them. I don't want them to become so self-absorbed that they're not sensitive to their environment and what goes on in it, because we all live in this world, and believe it or not, when you think one thing isn't affecting you, believe me, it is affecting you, because it's just not the way the world operates. I mean, the sun revolves, we revolve around the sun. So everything in the universe, that's why I think there's a God, whether you believe in there's a God or not, the universe is too orderly. In certain, it's just too calculated. How if the Earth moved a little too close to the sun, we could totally. It's just too. This is just not. This is an artist that created the universe, and however we relate to it, and I think in some ways, in our own primitive way, we try to still relate to it. But the one thing that we haven't learned yet, and I still say this, we have not learned to truly love. Just haven't. And that sounds so simple, but we have not. Man is still a very selfish creature, because I myself battle with my own selfish things. But you have to move to a higher place if you're really going to enjoy life. You cannot enjoy life if it's all about you. And I do not want my kids to think that the world revolves around you. You are just here for a moment, and a brief moment in time. Enjoy it. Try to live it right. Try to help people if you can. Try to just live right. It makes the world so much simpler. You know how much energy it takes to do bad stuff? It takes a lot of energy, and it drains you. But when you're doing something wonderful, you don't have all the baggage. So creativity is free. And I think when the artist stays free and he's true to his emotions and what he sees and he wants to reflect back to you what you're doing to one another or how you, I think that's an important development for us to move beyond this primitive stage of blowing each other up. We are doing some crazy stuff. We have all this technology, but we still are thinking so primitive in terms of how we interact with one another, and this is why you have all the chaos all the time. It's all about power and me. We become me society. And if I could do anything in my heart, I want to push us away from that as much as I can in my short span of time.
Well, what was wonderful was this evening with you, and I think we all want to welcome and thank you.
Watch this. I have nothing to say. Those of you who know me for a long time understand that we have people that come from all over the country to this location to acquire art, to meet artists, and never has anything like this ever happened. Now, in fairness to artists like Royo from Spain, there's a language barrier. Villanova, Pino, the deceased Italian master that we all loved and were friends with. We never had anything like this. And I'm going to see if I can embarrass you. Why you're not in mainstream television? Why are you with me? My sons told me when I said, well, what do I say? What do I do? And they say, Michael will be here. Don't worry about anything.
What I will say is you have a little bit of time left, but take those stickers and put them on some more.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. There are some lovely wines. There's an amazing dessert. And what did you just say? Thank you, folks. Thanks for being here.
Oh, doctor! I'm doing well. You're the one that